Welcome to the Scottish Watches podcast. What a week it has been. We've been on our travels, we've been in Geneva. Lots of things have happened in the Swiss watch industry. Rolex have bought Bucherer. Swatch Swatchamania is coming back to town with a bit of a hint of a 50 fathoms about it. And there is new PRXs, there are new APs, and much more, including all the information on our charity watch auction, which raised over $70,000. All that and more in this episode of the Scottish Watches podcast.
And it was a rather exciting week. Obviously, lots of news away from Geneva Watch Days, but there was lots of interesting things to be seen at Geneva Watch Days, which, as time goes past, proves itself every year to be just a little bit more than it was the year before. So some really quite spectacular releases.
I think you're correct, and let's just hit the road running. Let's cut out all the preamble, no BS, and let's talk about Swatch. It was a year and a half ago, Swatchamania hit the world, not just the UK, although we got to experience it in Edinburgh, you in person, me through the internet. They're at it again. They have taken another brand, perhaps not the one we would have thought of immediately to bring into the fold, but do you want to let us know what is currently out there news-wise that we can report to everybody listening and watching?
Yeah, so whilst we were away, Swatch dropped the news that there was going to be something. Now they kind of put some very thematic pictures based around water, which obviously kind of hinted towards maybe diving or some form of watch of that nature. And they hadn't put the brand, but they definitely put iconography that would suggest it was going to be along the lines of the Moonswatch, the Omega collaboration they had done previously. We know there's a couple of things in the work, shall we say, but it appears, because they have now, as we record this, actually dropped the name, and it's Blancpain. And I think it's going to be an interesting one, how this pans out. Will there be hype? Sure. Will it be quite as crazy as Moonswatch? I think that remains to be seen for me. I think this one might initially go through the roof, and it might die off quite a lot quicker than the likes of the Moonswatch.
I'm with you on that one. I think initially that will go crazy. I know that me and you'll probably take a trip to Edinburgh and we'll actually record some content there because we know what's about to happen. It will be twice as busy day one, and then it will fall off a cliff really quickly, and everyone will just be like, yeah, okay, cool, that was a nice party, but we don't want to be here to tidy up in the morning. Secondary prices will probably spike. First few days, it'll definitely not have the same longevity as the Moonswatch, and people will just be expecting the next brand, if it's Breguet, if it's Mido, if it's any of the other Swatch Group brands to get involved. But you know what? It's a good shot in the arm, and Moonswatchamania did help Omega. It did help lots of other brands, not just from the Swatch Group, but across the Swiss watchmaking industry. So it was a very good thing, and it got people wearing watches again. So good on them. They have got a good thing going. They have totally milked the shit out of the whole lunar cycle thing and the gold hands and the this, that, and the other. So they had to do something new. This is something new. Well done. Also, Rolex are in the news because it's not the certified pre-owned anymore. It's a little bit more than that. It's not clear casebacks and Daytonas, bubbles and emojis. They have decided to buy Bucherer. And that is something that I never saw coming. Never heard any kind of information on the grapevine about it whatsoever, even though I was at a Bucherer event a couple of months ago.
I don't think anybody saw it coming, that's for sure. That said, it's one that I think makes quite a lot of sense once you actually read the news and do a little bit more digging other than those kind of headlines that are designed to shock and dazzle. Bucherer are a significant player in the predominantly Swiss market, a little bit in Germany, a little bit in France, a little bit in England as well. But, you know, they're very much a regional retailer. Very important, though, one of the longest standing relationships that Rolex have with an AD or an authorised dealer, a family-owned business in Switzerland, so not owned, not traded in the stock market, not owned by shareholders. But the owner is getting on in years now. I think he's actually in his 80s. Doesn't have a kind of succession in place. I don't think he's got any family that wants to take the business on, and therefore the business was kind of coming up for sale. To me, makes perfect sense that Rolex have stepped in. They probably are doing it, in my opinion, because they want to keep the status quo going. They want to make sure that it's a stable, calm, conservative relationship that's not suddenly interjected by shareholders and publicly traded company or, you know, venture capital money, who will all be about that bottom line and not maybe quite as important to them about that long-term family relationship. So I think personally they've done it to have continuity and to know that they've got a safe partner in those markets, which is very important for them. That's my take on it. Did anyone see it coming? No. Is it going to be as impactful as, say, something like the CPO? I think personally the CPO is a bigger deal for the grey market and for the aftermarket and resellers than this is. And I don't think this will have a huge impact, to be honest, on most ADs, because Bucherer are in certain countries, but they're not in others, and it'll have zero impact on those guys.
You know what? It will have a big impact on the share price of Watches of Switzerland Group immediately.
That's a fair point. The news, of course, is and has caused a bit of ruction. That's the danger of being someone like Watches of Switzerland, being traded on the public stock market, is that investors get a bit jittery. They don't like sudden change. They don't like the unexpected, and they don't like the not knowing factor. Actually, as we said, they did take a bit of a tanking. I think not far off 30%. They ducked in about an hour after this, after the markets reopened the day after the announcement came out. The announcement came out right at the end of a kind of trading day, so didn't really the time to impact the market. But certainly within an hour of the markets opening the next day, it pretty much had a significant impact on them. I think slowly but surely that will recover. You could also argue there was a little bit of a correction due. Watch of Switzerland share price has been trading pretty high. And I think it's fair to say that the watch market is just slightly softer than it was, certainly for the last couple of years. The highs of COVID, it's not quite the same these days. So, yep, it's definitely had some impact. Long term, though, if you're a really good quality AD of Rolex in a market that is not directly beside Bucherer, if you're directly beside Bucherer, you're probably not an AD anyway. Therefore, I don't think if you're doing a good job, you've got too much to worry about.
No, I don't see any changes. Rolex had been removing the family businesses from the empire for years and years. We've heard stories in the past about certain British retailers in the high street that were asked, inverted commas and quote marks, to upgrade their premises and their infrastructure, invest millions of pounds, redeveloping, creating boutiques, only to then have the rug pulled from under them by Rolex saying, actually guys, we've changed our mind and you're not continuing to be one of our dealers. They've taken it all in-house, apart from Watch the Switzerland Group, they've got their own boutiques everywhere, and again, you still can't walk in and buy a watch. It's still exhibition only, long waiting lists, expressions of interest, and what is your buy history. So I don't think it'll change much. CPO didn't really change much. All it did was add a little bit of flair to the secondary market, allow secondary grey dealers to actually turn around and say, hey, this is a legit business enterprise, instead of the salespeople at Rolex ADs continuously saying, oh sir, do not buy a second-hand watch. That is not the done thing. Totally changed days there. But we'll see how it goes, and we should say that the Blancpain Swatch collab is slated for the 9th of September, is that correct?
Yep, that's the big day, and like we said, I think it's going to be pandemonium the first day, but let's see how long that pandemonium lasts.
Pandemonium, you say? Is that a little bit of foreshadowing about another watch we're going to talk about later on?
That may be.
But moving on to something that is a little bit more pocket friendly, although it is absolutely shit, ugly, hideous, there is a new PRX. And it doesn't have hands. And it looks like somebody has just taken the cheapest digital watch, popped the face out of it, grabbed a PRX and superglued the two together. Do you agree? Do you concur?
It is certainly not going to be adorned with the handsome title. I'm going to put it like that. It does have reminiscence of a cheap catalogue digital watch that may or may not have come out of a Argos-based business as I was a child. Very much harks back to the 1970s for me. I think it's got a little bit funky. Would I pay the in and about high 300s, £400 for one? Probably not. I don't think it's got the same flair as some of the watches that they've done from, say, Hamilton, where they've kind of done that retro digital thing, but they've done it, in my opinion, a lot better. This one feels a little bit weak, to be honest with you.
This was where you're getting your exams done and you've got the last 5 minutes before the bell goes and you just go down and mark everything C, hoping for the best. This is what they've kind of done here. They've run out of colours, they've run out of finishes, they've run out of handsets. Therefore, they've taken a kitchen egg timer and slotted it in. Not a big win for me, and I'm not saying this because I've seen press releases and pictures. On the way back to Scotland from Geneva, in the airport, you've obviously got all the boutiques because they're furnished with the latest and greatest because they're in Switzerland, they're in Geneva. And I got to see this thing in real life, and it is even more hideous than the pictures dictate. There will be people that like it. There are people out there that like the GP casquette. funnily enough. And I don't agree with that one, although Dave does. There's Dave waving his little hand. But we have kind of crammed through that. And the last watch that we're going to talk about that is nothing to do with Geneva Watch Days is a new Audemars Piguet. And again, this one looks like a box tick exercise to me. There doesn't appear to be much flair involved in it, even though it is a collaboration.
This is truly awful. Just no. For me, the Royal Oak, especially in its kind of classic form, is just one of those timeless pieces of design. And they've tried to scrape it back. And actually, my first thoughts on this, and I can never quite pronounce or remember exactly who the collaborative partner is, but it's like ALXXYY something. It's a whole load of letters jumbled together.
I think it's a French artist called Le Merde.
That's the one. They have this kind of narrative of minimalistic design and taking something and removing from it. And I think they've just gone too far. They've kind of taken any flair or design out of it. It's all gold. It's got no kind of deviation in terms of colour, even texturally.
I heard people say it looks like a bad Casio mod.
Yeah, or it looks like, you know, when you get like a chocolate mould of a watch that you might put on like a birthday cake, it just really has removed any form of personality of that watch.
Well, there's something that Dave doesn't like, I don't like, but something we really do like and really do love is the results for our charity auction. I told you on the show weeks and weeks ago, I hoped we would get over £20,000 through the auction. And I like to always be pessimistic, because if you're pessimistic, you can never be let down. You can only be impressed. You can only have a good time. And then it crept up to 30 grand. Then it was 35. And then we had our little event in Glasgow and things were going really well. It was up to 37. But by the end of the auction itself, within the closing, as I knew, within the closing minutes, the bids just went through the roof. That's all I can say. And I know that Only Watch is round the corner and it's in the tens of millions, hundreds of millions collectively over the years. But for us to do something with these amazing independent brands here in the UK, a couple a little bit further afield, it was just joyous. And the comments that we got back from people that had been involved in it, the people that made donations because they weren't bidding or they weren't winning, and then the emails we got through from the charity that has benefited saying how much this is drastically going to improve the lives of people that are requiring care, their families, their friends, and the infrastructure that's needed was just unbelievable. So Dave, do you want to run us through the watches, how much they raised, and then give us the grand total?
The results here are just outstanding. Blown away what you thought, what I thought, even probably what we secretly had in our heads that was, maybe it'll get 40 grand, you never know, maybe it will get there. And you always had it in your head that it was going to go crazy at the end and probably do very little up to then. But it went pretty crazy straight off the bat. Then we had a wee lull in the middle, and then it went crazy at the end as well. And between yourself, myself, and Sarah, just seeing those numbers lift at that last 10 minutes was just crazy.
Dave, I was in the bath washing my bits and pieces and I was hitting the refresh button to see what was going to pop up, and when I'm in the bath, usually other things pop up, but the numbers just kept increasing.
I know, it was insane because I think Sarah dropped a message in the group chat basically saying, the Studio Underdogs hit 12, and I was like, no chance, it's never hit 12. And as I'm looking it up, I was like messaging back, I think you'll find it's now 14, and then it was almost straight back, I think you'll find it's now 16. It was absolutely insane. But let's have a quick kind of overview of these. So number one on the list was one that was bought and has been won by somebody who's been on the show before, that being Brian Elsley, who is a great guy. And he, we didn't know he was going for this. We only actually found out after the fact when he posted a picture of it to say, I've got it on the wrist. And that was the Pollen, the prototype piece of one of their newer generation watches as well. And I am super happy that Brian got it. He's a Scotsman, albeit living in London, and he's a bit of a fanboy of the kind of Anardane Pollen family as well. So super happy to see that he got that. It went for in and about, I think, around about £2,000. So absolutely cracking result for that watch there.
Let me jump in and just tell everybody that we don't know who won because of data protection, GDPR, and the fact that we didn't let this out of the bag, but Sarah actually has changed jobs. She no longer works for Lion & Turnbull, and she had left them or had handed her notice in and was working out the remainder of her time there well before the auction was ending. So she hung around to help with and liaise with, even though, she didn't really have to do that. And we're super happy, and yet we can't wish her more than enough good luck in her new job for all the amazing things she did here at the end of her old job. And she wishes to continue the charity watch auction on in the future. So that is fantastic news. Anyway, on to the next watch, Dave.
Jussi from Isotope, who very kindly produced a special piece unique variant of the collaborative watch that we did with him maybe about 6 months ago.
6 months ago, also known as a year ago.
Fine. Then we move on to the Bamford. This was a prototype watch. This was one of a watch that he's been working on with his son. That one managed to garnish a pretty impressive 2,600 of your British pounds. Moving onwards, the Christopher Ward, again, a special piece unique variant of the collaborative watch that we did with those guys. That one managed to get to a very impressive £4,000. So we're great and super happy to see that getting such a great price point. Then we start to climb the hill onto William Wood. This one, had a good start, then it kind of settled down and it went a little bit bonkers at the end. This one hitting up at £6,500 for the William Wood, so an absolutely awesome result. And it's an orange watch, and as everyone knows, I like a bit of orange, so I'm super happy to see it getting that amount of money. Then we're into the big hitters. Nicholas at Fears, arguably one of the first people to commit to say yes, he will do a watch. I think he was possibly either the first or the second person to say, I'll definitely do a watch, and got working on it straight away and really put together something special for us. This one hit an absolutely amazing £14,000. Now this one, he now has informed us that this is the highest amount anyone has ever paid for a Fears at auction. Previously, he did a watch that I think did in and about $15,000, which is about £12,000. So at £14,000, this one has broken his record of auction. So fantastic.
And he actually told us over in Geneva, because we caught up with him for a very, very brief kind of intermediary brunch coffee, although we had to run away really quickly afterwards. And he'd said to us that while the auction was happening, in the closing stages, some of his collectors were on the phone to him to say, oh, I can't place my bid. There's a problem. I'm locked out because of, again, regulations, money laundering, things like that. If bids were starting to increase over around about the £6,000 mark, additional forms of ID had to be provided to continue the bidding process. So you had Nick at Fears, Richard at Fears, Sarah at the auction house, plus all the team behind the scenes at around about 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock at night, going absolutely crazy to make sure that everybody had the opportunity to bid and keep bidding right to the very end, because every single penny, me and Dave didn't make anything, Sarah didn't make anything, the auction houses didn't make anything, and the brands did not make anything. This was all done completely free of charge. The only people to gain the money was Maggie's. So again, massive thank you to Fears, the team there, and everybody else who was involved. And what's the next watch?
Then we have the Sartre Billard, a last minute entry, but he absolutely pulled it out of the bag to make sure he got this watch completed and got it to us in record time. This one got a great price point at £3,600. Someone with that watch is going to have a real special watch. Then we have the Anne Ordain, again, a very special piece. If you listen to the episode, Lewis goes into great depth about how this watch came to be and how we very luckily ended up with it in the auction. This one managed to hit £5,500, which is a handsome amount of money for the Anne Ordain. And then the watch that I think that blew everybody away was the Studio Underdog. Even Rich was blown away. This watch garnished an absolutely outstanding amount of £16,000, which I think is just unbelievable. And it really, along with the Fears, were two watches that underpinned us getting to that massive amount of money that just has made such a difference to Maggie. So thank you everybody that bid on a watch and won something, whether you won or didn't. Thanks for taking part, because even by not winning, you've helped to kind of boost those prices up there when someone else has outbid you. And I know it's always a tough one to take when you don't get what you want, but just be thankful that the prices got up there, which meant that everyone got, very much what they want.
And Dave, you forgot one last thing, didn't you?
Indeed, there was one lot that was not a watch. And this was a picture from Grand Seiko that was kindly contributed to the auction by Jonathan at the Edinburgh Watch Company, who he himself had won this in a raffle at a Grand Seiko event a good couple of years ago. but immediately had handed it to me and said, if ever something comes up in the future where this can be used for a good cause, I want you to have it because you can use it. And that was a good few years ago.
That was 4 years ago, Dave. 4 years ago.
Pre-COVID. And never quite did the opportunity arise until this auction. And then we did a bit of scrabbling around. We underplayed it at first. We knew that it had been signed by the designer themselves. We weren't entirely sure if it was actually an original or it was a print, but it turns out it was an original. And we updated the auction details and it went for a very, very good price point of, I think, £1,100. So someone has got a very unique piece of artwork there for that price point. So another lovely one there. Now, as Ricky mentioned earlier, we don't know who won the vast majority. In fact, I think only other than one, we don't know who won any of these. GDPR, data protection. If you want to remain anonymous, not a problem. If you want to tell us that you might have won something and what you think of it and how pleased you are with it, please do let us know. Don't DM us on Instagram. Drop us either a message to me or Ricky if you know us, or drop us an email and let us know if you're happy to have a shout out. We'd be more than delighted to personally thank you for taking part in the auction.
More so than that, Dave. If they want to actually come on and spend a couple of minutes on the show telling us why they liked the watch so much that they bid and won the auction, we would love to have them on here because we're not in the minds of the collectors who got involved here. I did want to bid on a couple of the watches, and that is absolutely not the done thing. That would have been seen as very dodgy. So a couple of those got away from me, but I'd love to speak to the people who actually ended up with them on wrist and get in the mind of what it was like to bid right up to the last minute when the figures were changing and incrementing all the time. And again, we don't have access to the database. It's locked up tight. So please get in touch. Drop us an email, info@scottishwatches.co.uk. That is also the place that you want to reach out to if you want to get in touch about anything to do with the show. If you want to suggest a guest, if you want to come on yourself, if you're a collector, or if you want to talk about a watch, you want to get involved with the writing team and do some stuff on the website, info@scottishwatches.co.uk is the only email address to use. Now, we should probably talk about Geneva Watch Days because, well, actually, no, let's do a wrist check because we've rushed ahead. We've got a good few releases out of the way. We've talked some industry news. We've got the charity done. We've still got more than half the show to go, so we should probably do a wrist check. And I believe, Dave, you have a better watch than me this week, so you can go first.
I like how you tried to trick me into coming first there.
It's no trick. You're about to do it.
I'll take it because you did such a good job. You did such a good job that I'll let you away with that. So mine is a little watch that actually, this is not an expensive watch, and this is something that I had backed on Kickstarter a long time ago, and I had forgotten all about it. And I came back from Geneva to a package, and I thought, oh, what's this? Why is FedEx? Why is it a FedEx package? And I opened it to find My Little Cylindrics, which is a company that I've done a couple of watches before, but here we go. Now, it looks from the end pretty normal.
This is the point in the show where we forget to tell you to check the show notes to play along at home. All the pictures of all the watches, all the news, all the stuff we've chatted about here, plus links, Instagrams, YouTubes, technical spec and details will be in there. In your podcast player, click the link that you can see in this particular episode of the show. That will take you to our website, to the particular page that is designated for this episode, and you can see all the stuff in chronological order.
There we go. So, the Cylindrics is a cylinder, funnily enough, the name gives it away, of sapphire glass. It has two movements. You have a very normal looking watch on the end, which is a little Miyota automatic movement. Then you have this rather funky baton style.
James Bond bomb style?
Yeah, a bit like a kind of combination lock on a suitcase or something of that ilk. Then you have this rotor. That's the rotor that runs the second movement, which is the same movement, but it runs the second one. So 2 crowns on here, you can set them separate times. So ultimately it could be a GMT watch if you wish it to be, as you can set both of them completely independently. They both run independently as well. But I'll be honest, it is a bit weird on the wrist. Definitely got that vibe of a very inexpensive MB&F-esque type watch or something from, Urwork or something like that. But it's really funky. It's actually been keeping very accurate time, to be honest with you. So I've been slightly gobsmacked by it. And I think, from memory, I paid something like £400 for it. So it's a funky little toy.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, exactly. I was gobsmacked by how good it is. I kind of thought, okay, at that money, I'll probably go badly wrong, but it's not the worst money to lose in the world. Super happy with this. Would happily pay quite a lot more for it. So yeah, Ricky hasn't seen this in person yet. I've got a feeling when Ricky sees this in person, he's going to be like, I rather like that, because it's going to be right up his street. So anyway, that's what I'm wearing. Let's get on with it.
Let's get on with nothing. Let's have a chat about this thing. So that looks like an inexpensive version of the Rebellion watches, particularly a version we saw at Watches Wonders this year, where it has got almost a ratchet strap mechanism for winding. And I absolutely loved it. Didn't absolutely love the price, obviously, because I'm a cheap Scottish bastard. But that there, for like a few $100, perfect. And sapphire is not a cheap thing to make. We have been told numerous times when we were in Geneva over the last week how expensive sapphire actually is to utilise, create, mould. Everything to do with it is just expense. So that is an absolute bargain, and it's got the little twirly bit at the end. It's a little bit Jacob & Co. We'll talk about that later on with their Bugatti watches, and also a little bit Perrelet, another brand that we got to see over in Geneva. So I will quickly wrist check and get it out of the way for you guys. Again, we had a watch sitting on my doorstep, and you can't see it on the video, so let me just pop it off the wrist and try not to break it because it's a cheap watch. So I got this little guy when I came back. Same idea. It wasn't FedEx, it was some other nondescript delivery brand had left this new Casio G-Shock, and it's not a Casio. It's kind of the futuristic Tron version of the Casio that came out afterwards. It looks very similar, but the underpinnings are completely different. And I actually think it looks better because it doesn't look like a Royal Oak ripoff. Very cool watch. Got it for about 88 quid, which is cheaper than you would usually find. And it's not turquoise, it is definitely blue because I was out and about with it yesterday. And yes, it is blue. Great little watch for the money. Looks cool on the wrist. It's got a kind of ombre colour to the strap as it leads down to a dark at the tail ends. Yeah, really cool watch. Look in the show notes, you'll see some pictures of it. And the best thing about it is it's a G-Shock you can actually press the fucking buttons on. Did you like the fact that Ben at Norcane in the previous edition of the show that came out our last interview show before we went away actually agreed with you, backed you up and gave you a pass on your pronunciations?
I mean, that's because he's a guy that understands how to say turquoise. Simple as that.
He does. And we are a couple of guys that understand what it's like to travel from Scotland to Geneva and spend a week in glorious Scottish sunlight leading into amazing Geneva sunburn. And that was the end of the week. Got there a couple of days early because I wanted to acclimatise to what I thought was going to be warmer weather, have a look around the place, get the bearings, and it turned out the hotel that I had booked at a super cheap price of around about 150 quid a night including taxes was 2 streets away from the actual main event at the Beau Rivage.
You did. I think you certainly lucked out when it came to your location, which I don't think was so much by design as by luck. And you booked a decent little hotel and you got very close to it. And as we know, both myself and Ricky have been caught in the queues at passport control at Geneva. No queues for me, straight through because the flight crew go through a separate way. And I just quite happily wandered through passport control. So altogether, a very pleasant, quiet airport for me. Unfortunately, an awful lot of people, not so much.
I did the same thing. Turns out, because I had decided to take Simona with me, it was a combination of a watch event. And this is, people talk about press trips and getting flown around all over the world. Sometimes brands will take you places to showcase new watches. Sometimes they do not. And at events like this, you pay your own dime. That's why there was hardly any people from further afield. There was a lot of people from the European contingents, the UK, mainland continental Europe. But as you go across to Singapore, Australia and America, not so many folks because it costs an absolute ton to get there. I had paid my own plane fare, I'd paid my own hotel, food and drink, everything. Same with Dave, obviously. And I decided, well, since it's not a brand that's covering the bill, I'm going to take Simona with me because we just got engaged. It'll be a good little holiday. Plus, she obviously loves watches like hell. And she absolutely adored this trip. She got to meet some of her favourite makers. She got to meet some new people she didn't know existed and fell in love with their watches and their history and all the storytelling that went along with it. But the Monday, we became acclimatised. We went a little walk. We found some boutiques, some little watch shops, some little brands that we'd never heard of before. And it's good just to have that new stuff hitting you in the face, to be able to see it. We saw the new Swatch squares. The What Ifs, I think they were called. Is that right, Dave?
Yeah, that's I think the collection or the capsule collection is called the What Ifs.
Well, I'm glad What If did not happen a good few years ago because these things were terrible. They looked okay in pictures, but when you put them on the wrist, they were super plastic fantastic. They didn't sit right, and you'll see the pictures in the show notes. I am not a fan of them. But that was Monday, and as Monday tailed off and we were getting ready for Tuesday when the event actually started, it turned out that across from my hotel, a couple hundred yards down the road, there was a pedestrian crossing, and the green man in this pedestrian crossing was like the bat signal. It shone like a laser beam through our hotel window. It almost kept us up all night, but it didn't, because we were up to other things that entertained ourselves. But then we got up on Tuesday, we caught up with you, and it was time to hit the show.
This show has got bigger and bigger, as we've mentioned before. There's lots of brands and lots of people to cover. And because it's a bit more chilled out and laid back, the brands are definitely not quite as regimented as they are somewhere like Watches and Wonders. It's not in, out, in, out. They will spend the time chatting. And with the people that you know, it tends to be a bit of chat before you get down to the dirty of looking at the watches. But the first place to start was Chapek, and they had pretty impressive watch. Not what most of you think. It was not another Antarctique. This was one from their Place Vendôme collection, and this is a Complicité, and it was a pretty great looking watch. What's your thoughts on this one, Ricky?
I can't remember much about it because it was the first appointment of the show, and Xavier was there. And he just talked, and an extra 10 minutes were added on to the time we spent there versus the time we spent in our next appointment. So I can't remember anything about the watch. It looked cool. It's not my style, probably more your style. I did have a look at the Antarctique, some of the limited edition, the special editions. We heard some rumours that there were going to be some new things coming out in the next couple of months, so we will keep our eyes on that. And we got to see the different case sizes as well. But again, look in the show notes, full details, full links, all the information will be there. And then we moved from Chapek after Xavier released us from his clutches to where?
To Burn Watches, a brand that was basically celebrating its first birthday. They launched themselves 1 year ago at this very show, and this husband and wife team have done some really different things. They are the guys that created the watch where the 12, the 3, the 6 and the 9 rotate as a cube, and every day you've got a different face. So over a period of 4 days, you've got 4 different looking watches. Initially they had similar, they had a stealth face, they had a Roman face, they had a numeral face. They've had some different ones like that, but they've introduced a couple of new ideas. They've got some techniques that allow them to do different logos and icons on there, and they've also got this stripped back version that effectively removes the dial to show you how this quite ingenious mechanism works. I'm quite a big fan of these guys, very down to earth, really friendly, and they were, really pleased to see us. They were like, "Hi guys, we remember you from last year." Just a really cool brand doing something a little bit different.
This was the brand that last year, when I turned up with George Bamford and we handed our business cards across, they saw Bamford's card and went, cool. And then they saw the Scottish Watches card and they went crazy. Oh, Scottish Watches, Scottish Watches. Yeah, George doesn't like that story, so I like repeating it a lot. Anyway, the watches are amazing. The technology is fantastic. I got to spend more time with the brand's watches in Glasgow because they don't have many boutiques or dealerships across the world, which is unfortunate. But again, the guys we always mention in the show because they always do so well is James Porter & Son. They have got a selection of these timepieces right there. You can take them out, you can put them on the wrist, you can play with them, you can see exactly how they're put together and designed. And the one that stuck out this year, which is obviously, as you say, 1 year down the road, very strange that, because it's a 1 year anniversary for them, 1 year anniversary for me with Simona, but the one that they showcased and they dragged us to the window to see it, it had a peacock colour scheme. You look at it straight on, it's blue. You tilt it slightly and it starts to move to green. It's like some of those car paint effects on TVRs back maybe 20 years ago. Incredible looking.
But that combined with this kind of skeleton, or I say skeletonized, de-dialed watch is probably more accurate. Some really cool things coming from these guys.
Yeah, totally. I spoke to the designer who was just giving me all the background. It's a husband and wife team. And he was telling me how he designed this, how he designed that, but the customers liked the fact that you could take the dial off and look underneath. But moving from them to another brand that is equally impressive, and that's HYT. They've played musical chairs with their CEO and the team behind the scenes. They've had some ups and downs over the past 3 or 4 years. We reviewed their watches. We had Pietro from Limited Edition on recording videos with us many years ago, but they're back, they're bigger, they're bolder, And they have now got this team in place instead of a main figurehead CEO. And we got to see some of their new releases. Some of them are incredible. We're talking Jacob & Co level of watch finishing, jewellery, all kinds of stuff. So did you have a look at these?
I think what they've done for these new releases is elevated the brand from maybe what people believed they were before. Very technology heavy, obviously using this bellow system with the oil and the fluids as a kind of way of telling the time. They then simplified it slightly by having some parts in that mode and some parts in a more traditional mechanical mode. But the central tourbillon that they released this year, but still incorporating that fluid liquid technology that they're so well known for, really did, for me certainly, like you mentioned, help to elevate the brand into almost a whole different category. It's like a hybrid of something you might find from MB&F, with something you might find from Urwork, with something you might find from, more traditional like Jacob & Co or all of these kind of brands, but done in a way that doesn't look like a mishmash. It kind of came together. So some very impressive work from these guys. Certainly not your pocket money kind of price point with these watches. These are very limited production. I think only maybe 8 pieces of this one they're making. So super small numbers worldwide. If you have one, you will be in a very rare club. But yeah, really cool what they're doing.
Yeah, that's the conical tourbillon, and it was around about 300 grand there or thereabouts. And you're right, they've taken it from sci-fi concept car that you might see at a big motor show to what you can actually get to put on the wrist. And you can see how the original ones were a little bit bulbous, and the newer ones are a lot slimmer, a lot thinner. And then, as we say, this one here, it's almost like a Jacob & Co. And fingers crossed we can actually get the brand to come onto the show. We've tried a couple of times, but things have been in flux with the management team, as we said. I think they've got a handle on it just now, so the potential is we can get them on to talk about all this amazing NASA-created technology, the bellows system, the world's second most expensive fluid that they use to tell the time under scorpion venom, the full shooting match. We'll hopefully have them on to talk about that.
Then we popped in to see the guys at Frederic Constant and Alpina. Obviously, both these brands are Swiss brands, but falling under the ownership of the Citizen Group. And both of them, for me, are, especially Frederic Constant, have done some pretty funky things that maybe are not what you would expect out of one of those brands that I guess sits at more of the entry price points for Swiss mechanical watches. What's your thoughts on what they had with their, believe the 31st caliber that these guys as a brand have managed to kind of come up with of themselves?
An admission of guilt here. Frederic Constant is a brand that I knew nothing about. It's like Raymondville, exactly the same in my mind. It's a brand you would see in a shop window, wouldn't pay much attention to for no apparent reason. And I thought perhaps they had been running for hundreds of years. Turns out they're only about 35 years old, there or thereabouts. And when I sat down with the team, it was a total education for me. I picked the watches up and they were so well executed, so well put together. The crafting, the movement technology on both. Turns out Alpina is an older brand that was bought and brought into the fold, but they had this elegant, classic looking, it was perhaps like a Patek gondola, something along those lines, but on the Frederic Constant side, they had some amazing looking watches with great complications, and then the price tag was extremely low. So that again is another brand that hopefully we can investigate a little bit further, because we like to cater to all audiences in the show. Not everybody has got massive deep pockets. We don't. So it's good to speak about the lower end price point brands right the way up to, like I say, your Jacob & Co.'s.
And I think for me, Frederic Constant, a brand that I have a bit more familiarity with, but for me, they're the kind of dark horse who have got some really genuine good horological kind of grounding to them and produce some watches that deserve a little bit of a look. Might not be your aesthetic, but they've got many different watches in their range. They've got a pretty considerable range, and they've got a few funky technologies in there that are definitely worthy of a look.
Next up is a brand called Bianchi. We saw them a year ago. We've heard about them for a while because Andy Good from the Devoy Group here in the UK deals with them, and we've got to experience them on the wrist over the past couple of years. A year ago, it was the marketing company that were at Geneva Watch Days to showcase and promote the brand. This year, the husband and wife team that created the brand themselves were there to talk about their passion and using the golden ratio involved in everything from their case design to the way the mechanism, the movements and the placement of the wheels sit within the back of the actual watch itself. Love these. People give them a hard time saying, oh, it's just a cheap copy of a Richard Mille. And I read this in one of the blogs, and one of the owners came on, the husband of the pair, and he actually explained that, yes, it's a tonal shape, but look at every steel sports diver watch. It's the same shape. And then he went on to explain the different way the mechanism was done. They don't have screws and bolts that are shown. They don't have this. They don't have that. They have these different things versus RM and other brands like Frank Muller. And we will copy and paste the details into the show notes because it makes so much sense. Yes, in a quick glance, looks a little bit like, but then again, how many watches look a little bit like? So great brand. It was good to sit down with the people that came up with the idea. They were telling us they were involved in the fintech industry. They had got a little bit bored perhaps with it. They'd always loved watches and they wanted to take their experience of building businesses in one area of the industry and take it into watchmaking, and they've done great things.
I agree with you. In regards to that, I'm sure a lot of people immediately go, oh, it's just a rip-off, or it's a Richard Mille, it's a cheaper Richard Mille. It definitely isn't. It's because, I guess, Richard Mille are known for that tonneau shape, but lots of brands have tonneau-shaped watches, not just Richard Mille.
Next up is a brand from Australia with a lot of European heritage, and that's Bozell. And I'm probably mispronouncing it, even though I spoke to the guy that runs the company probably 20 times, because it was almost as if he had dropped an AirTag into my back pocket. He was everywhere I was. He was at the events at night. He was walking down the road when I was there. He was telling us that he was away for a 7 a.m. swim in Lake Geneva. This is a guy that looks like Ed China from Wheeler Dealers, with a very European accent, apparently German, sounded more Swiss to me, and he is about 6 feet 8 inches tall, mammoth of a giant, gentle giant, and he was just so fun. He was telling us that he met his wife who was Australian. They moved to Australia. Their kids are a little bit back and forward with both. He likes to involve them in all the Europeanisms, and he just loves watches. So he started a watch brand. He's got a lot of different iterations, some limited edition releases, and the ones that we saw that really stuck out to us were very conservatively priced but very high quality. And his kind of calling card, I would say, is instead of the usual 12,369, he goes 12,480. There's a couple of brands that have done that in the past, but I've not really seen anything recently. That's what stuck out to me. Great quality, good fit, good finish, and we have been experiencing quite a bit in the last few months because I've been speaking to their US agent about potentially doing something in the future with them. So check the show notes, have a look at the pictures, click on to find out more about those releases because they are definitely worth checking out.
Then we went to Jacob & Co, which was hosted in their boutique, which is a mere 5-minute walk away from the main venue of most of the hotels that host the brands. Now, Ricky, what's your thoughts? I know that maybe somebody who was with you was rather taken by what she saw.
Yeah, it turns out there was a hit list that I was unaware of from the Bulgarian that accompanied me on my travels, and she wanted to meet Chaikin, who she absolutely adores, not just for the Ristma and the Joker watches, but the other watches, the Mars, the clocks with the greatest amount of complications in them. He is known across the world for the Joker, but that is not what it's not what he should be known for. He should be known for far, far more. And I suppose it's like a band that's got that one hit that everybody knows, they all sing, and perhaps it's a wedding tune, but they've got catalogues of other amazing musical accomplishments. That's Konstantin Chaikin, and it was great to meet him. But we're not going to talk about him just yet. We're going to talk about Jacob & Co. because, as Dave says, we were there last year. I remember we were sweating our balls off. Not quite so much this year. They had the air conditioning running properly, but when you walk into their boutique, it is like entering Fort Knox. It is security left, right and centre. To get to the actual watches, you have to walk up an amazing staircase. And usually you'd have pictures of different models, etc., etc. No, here you have pictures of celebrities, singers, actors, footballers, extremely famous folks wearing Jacob & Co watches. And then you get upstairs to the actual boutique part. And we sat down and we spent an hour with the team there looking at new watches. Simona got to try on some amazing timepieces. And it was only towards the end we found out the gentleman that's sitting across the table from us is actually their master watchmaker and designer. He didn't crack a light earlier on in the conversation as we're talking about things. It was only when I teased it out of him, he explained who he was and his function within the business. Some really cool watches. They had one in particular they were promoting because it was new, and they didn't tell us the price until the end, and I was absolutely shocked at how low cost figuratively speaking, when it comes to Jacob & Co, this piece was, and it harked back to Jacob's past when he was a child, around about 13 years of age, and how he got encompassed into the whole world of watchmaking.
This is probably not the watch you would be expecting to see if you hear the words Jacob & Co. Much more toned down, much more conservative, dare I say, classy looking, in my opinion, that is. I think this is it shows what Jacob & Co can do if they really want to put their mind and their kind of ideology to something much more traditional and conservative. The price point you mentioned, whilst not exactly inexpensive, at $57,000 is markedly lower than most people would assume you would be paying for a Jacob & Co. I actually have to say, I quite like this watch. In fact, I'll go further. I really like it.
The watch in question is called The World Is Yours, and it's a jewel time. It has got blue everywhere to signify the oceans across the planet, and then it's got gold to signify the continents on there. And yes, the price is expensive, but it ain't expensive when it comes to Jacob & Co. And it's a brand that I like. I mean, I know what they do, I know the heritage, I know the past, I know the history, I know who they deal with. I love the Epic X, it's one of my favourites, and I nearly bought one a few years ago when I found one going a little bit cheaper than perhaps it should have been. But they do great things, and that at 57k versus the $750,000 watch that Simona got the chance to wear on her wrist, or the billionaire watches, the millionaire watches, all the crazy stuff that they've released over the years. It was a solid piece. Really liked it. Very nice. And like you say, if it didn't say Jacob & Co on the dial, you would never have thought it came from that house. We also got to check out a few of the watches that perhaps were not as recent, but I wanted to have a look at. And one of those was the Bugatti. I think it's the Chiron edition. And this is a sapphire cased watch with an actual functioning miniature engine inside. And I never realised this because I've only seen pictures and short video clips. Everything in it moves to the point where the turbines on the little turbochargers spin when the watch is running. Absolutely fantastic. Don't know the price. Don't want to know the price. All I know is it's a great piece of engineering, and that's what it's all about with Jacob & Co. It's jewellery, it's high functioning, it's fantastic engineering and watchmaking all mixed together. And if that is a little bit too expensive for your wrists, your tastes and your wallet, if you want a little spinny thing on the wrist, you can always speak to the guys at Perrelet, and that was the next port of call for us, and we got to see the usual fare. Their turbine watches, we've had them in for review before. We had the Rainbow a couple of years ago, and they're cool. They really are the ultimate fidget spinner, even more so than my Mad One Red. But along with different colour iterations and different pastel shades this year of existing lineups, they had a watch that was more classically styled. It even gave me vibes of some Carré Vautelaine stuff, which is crazy when you say it's from Perrelet, but again, they had that kind of rotor-esque turbine movement just under the dial that was skeletonized around the periphery so you could see it rotating, and it had that kind of swiveling coin edge turbine look to it. Really cool looking watch. What did you think of that one, Dave?
This is a brand as well that I guess kind of floats under the radar for a lot of people as well, but if you like that, I guess maybe more industrial, going into like, you know, that kind of engine-esque, whether it be aviation or motor vehicles or turbochargers, it's just got a bit of a funky, slightly different vibe and look to it as well. But personally, I quite like these more muted colours, like the green they did as well. For me, that's, you know, I think that's moving more towards a territory where I could potentially see myself wearing something like that personally. So yeah, really good.
Next up, we had a bit of a difficult time. We were looking for a brand that weren't in one of the big massive function suites, but they were kind of hidden away in the lobby, in a corner, and we found them down in the bar, funnily enough, although they weren't drinking. And the reason was they had one watch to show. They didn't need a full room, but the three people involved in the brand were there, and this brand is called Our Time. Have you heard of them? Do you remember the watch? Do you remember how classy and funky it was?
I hadn't really kind of registered on my consciousness, but I can remember looking at it, and you're right. I think it would be described as something classically futuristic is how I would describe it.
Sapphire, skeletonized, not even skeletonized, designed in a way that it was created so you could see everything. and parts of the movement looked like they were just hanging in the air. And that's when you know they've done a good job when they've designed a watch, when you can't actually tell how the different parts are linked together, how they function. And we saw that a couple of times that different brands we'll speak about later on, but it was good to speak to the three creators, older gentlemen. They weren't young pups, they had been seasoned within the industry, they were all big veterans from different houses, and they also work on different components and technologies for those big houses that we're not allowed to mention. Check the show notes if you want to see more and to find out more about this brand. But again, another one that is out there doing amazing things when they don't really need to. Some of these creators and watchmakers could earn a packet and do so working for the big houses, the big brands, but they want to do their own thing. They want to carve out a little bit of horological history for themselves, and the guys at Our Time are definitely going to be doing that. Moving on from there, Dave, we got to see a watch based on a Pope watch, and this was near the end of the day.
This was, and this is from a band called Haute Rive. Now, let's get straight to the point. Their party trick is Power Reserve. And oh my goodness, we're not talking about a little bit more than you would expect from most brands. We're talking about a whole lot more. And I think both of us maybe were slightly taken aback when I believe it was 1,000 hours was mentioned, which was somewhat of a surprise, it has to be said.
This one here, the way it was explained that the gentleman had put it together in his background in watchmaking, and he had rushed to get this prototype ready for the show, and it was ready hours before the show, and we weren't allowed to fully play with it just in case something came off in our hands. He actually had books showcasing this Pope watch that had come out years and years and years, hundreds of years ago or whatever, and they had medals and certificates because it's a very rich watchmaking history that he's involved in. So you can tell us a little bit more about the guy and the watch and where he's going to be taking this.
So this is an individual whose background really comes from kind of microengineering, both in microelectronics and in the watch industry. So he's used to dealing with things in very small scale. He did some work as well, I believe, with Patek Philippe in regards to silicon technology and engineering and kind of developing silicon technologies. So this individual has huge amounts of experience within watchmaking and the kind of intricacies that are needed. And as he mentioned, he decided to set forth on his own and try and break some records, which he has done. So this 41-day, 1,000-hour Power Reserve does set a new record for kind of autonomy within the watch industry, certainly mechanical watches. An unbelievable amount of time, even to the point where he did have to design a special winding mechanism for this watch, which utilizes the bezel as opposed to the crown, because I think he mentioned that if you had to wind it via the crown, you would have to turn it, I think it was verging on thousands of times to get it to be fully wound, plus the amount of torque that's needed would just probably snap the crown stem. Therefore, he's got this winding mechanism that was based around, holding on to that kind of effectively where you would normally have your bezel, and it's quite knurled on the bezel so that you could get some grip in it, and it allows you to turn it in order to wind the watch, which, to be fair, if it's running for 1,000 hours, you're not going to have to do that often, it has to be said. I was very taken by this. I'm really going to look forward to getting my hands on a finished, let's not say prototype, a finished kind of semi-pre-production watch, because as he did say, please be delicate with these because they've just been finished and they're not quite as they're going to be when they eventually make it to market. But it was running, it was working. This wasn't a kind of fake watch with some weight stuck in it to make it feel like a watch. This was an actual proper working prototype, and extremely impressive it was too.
Funny you mention that. There was a brand, and I can't remember who it was, and I probably would tell you if I could remember. They had a fake watch, as in a lump of metal. It looked a little bit like the watch they were going to release. And when you rotated it round, they'd printed a sticker of what the back of the movement would look like.
Indeed, it was just a weight sample, I believe, probably for photography. And as you said, you turned it over and you kind of chuckled to yourself. And I watched you pointing it out where they've literally put, and it wasn't even a particularly good photographic sticker. It was just a really cheap sticker that was stuck on the case back to pretend it had a rotor on it.
Then it was time for the nighttime festivities, and one thing I noticed at the show itself was the amount of supercars and hypercars that were floating around. I'm never in Geneva unless there's a big event on, so I'm not used to it. Perhaps it's day by day. There's a lot of Porsches around as well, day by day. but you could actually hire a supercar at night because they parked a whole load of Lamborghinis and Ferraris and Porsches in front of Beau Rivage. Not that we did that because we were busy doing other stuff, but we went to the tent, the Geneva Watch Days marquee, where the nighttime celebrations were happening, and we met loads of people within the media, within the industry, the watch creators, some of the people we'd already met during the day, loads of people we were about to meet, and they had all the watches from all the different brands on display that you could actually walk up, rotate your head around. You couldn't take them out of the glass cabinets, but you could see them there, and they were all wound and they were all functioning, which was great if you hadn't seen the brand or you didn't have an appointment. And it led into the fact that lots of members of the public came across to the public days, and again, they could experience stuff there as well. And we also spotted Paul Thorpe, Spencer from BQ Watches, and I think the other guy's called Kevin, a guy that runs a car firm that Paul's dealing with and has on the show every so often. And it turns out I was the best dressed for the first time in my life because Paul turned up, as he usually does, wearing funky streetwear to this place where everyone is suited and booted. So I ended up a little bit drunk, worse for wear, and Paul dragged me on for a quick live stream on YouTube with him. When I turned round, Simona had disappeared. She had found some of her, well, not country folk, but continent folk, because a couple of the 7-foot tall Jacob & Co models had been grabbed by Simona for some pictures down by the lake. So it was a great night, had loads of fun. That kind of ended the first day, and that ends this episode of the show because there's no way we can cram any more in with all the news, the releases, the charity information, and Geneva Watch Days. We're going to have to just carry this on into the next episode, which I think we may even drop out this coming Thursday, and we're going to mess our schedule up yet again.
So we have a huge amount still to cover, but for the next couple of episodes where we're covering Geneva Watch Days, none of that preamble. We have obviously informed you all about the auction and all of that important news with Rolex and with Swatch. So we'll be straight into it in the next episode regarding Geneva Watch Days.
Thank you for tuning in. If you want to check out what we're up to, we're on Instagram at Scottish Watches. Drop us an email, don't DM us, info@scottishwatches.co.uk, and our website, scottishwatches.co.uk. Lots of news, reviews, previews, articles. If you want to get involved, drop us a line. We can put you in touch with the team that deal with that. That's Philologus, Mark, Miziel, Ralph, tons and tons of great folks behind the scenes making sure that all the content you want is there in a plentiful supply. So thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you guys again soon.